Thank you all for coming. Let us pray. Gracious God, all that we have and all that we are is your gift, not our possession. You alone are the owner of justice. We hold it only as borrowers and never as a weapon. Forgive us when our virtue becomes a hiding place for pride, when we draw a line and place our neighbor on the far side of it, certain that we stand with the light. Loosen our grip on the need to be right and the quieter need to see others proven wrong. Make us realists about the power we wield and the sin we carry, yet free us from despair, for we are at once sinners and by your grace already justified. Send us into this hour and into this anxious time as people of humility and courage, quick to listen, slow to curse, and faithful to the one who took the place of the scapegoat rather than make one of us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so let's see. Children of light, children of darkness. Let's see if this is working. Yes. So, what is the problem? The problem is Pastor Tom and Ted fear that America is facing a crisis that our very existence as a democratic society is threatened. As children of light, Tom and Ted lift up the high-minded values of justice, freedom, equality for everyone, care for the poor, and peace on earth. Will these values save America? And of course, Reinhold Niebuhr replies, Tom and Ted, you're naive. You're not realistic. You don't take original sin seriously enough. The course of history is not determined by high-minded values and nice people who lift up wholesome goals. No, the course of events is determined by power. It's power against power. Get real, you guys. I don't know, the more I say that, are we overstating this a little bit? I don't know. Maybe it's my tendency to minimize sin.
Right. Tell Reinhold Niebuhr to just go away.
That's right. I don't want to be reminded all the time. Okay, let's see. The children of light and the children of darkness. So what I've tried to do is summarize and then a series of questions. So the summary is kind of putting together chapter 3 and Ted's essay on chapter 3. Is a Substack post. Chapter 3 in the book is entitled The Community and Property. And we're going to look at this. You know, this is, like I said, the synthesis and discussion. Let me see. So we're going to look at this kind of together as an argument in four movements. Property is power. Both ideologies, the bourgeois liberal and Marxist, are utopian. Movement number one. Number two, the answer is not a system but a procedure. And we'll get into that in a little bit. The deeper temptation is to possess justice. And then the last movement is a Christian posture toward the crisis. Okay? This is probably familiar. So, property is power, and both ideologies are utopian. And please ask questions, make comments, just raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. You can speak into the mic. So, number one, property is power, and both ideologies are utopian. They're both utopian about it. Liberalism and Marxism both are illusions of the children of light. Niebuhr's third way to deal with this is a free economy under government's moral and legal supervision. Might be a little hard to imagine what that looks like today, but we'll talk about that. So, and again, this is kind of summarizing. And then the second one, movement 2, is not a system but a procedure. Niebuhr says there's no natural harmonies in history. In other words, that laissez-faire capitalism does not equally distribute to all.
Right. Adam Smith, among the economists, thought that the selfish people all went to the marketplace to buy and sell goods. There's an invisible hand, divine providence, that would make sure that justice is done. And Reinhold Niebuhr says that invisible hand's not there.
Of course, then we got to the 80s and found out there was this another invisible hand that let things flow from the rich folks down to the poorer folks.
Supply side economics.
Yes, exactly. So the property question is resolved case by case within democracy. And there's a phrase for that. At the bottom, you can see, democracy is a method of finding proximate solutions for insoluble problems. And we'll get more into that. So, and Ted suggests our insoluble problem today, the threat of oligarchy. Let's see, the deepest property is justice. The supreme property is justice, and the supreme sin is thinking we own it. Owning justice makes virtue the very vehicle of sin. Moral pride, you have a kind of a course of things, or a movement. Moral pride leads to cursing and scapegoating. And again, we'll get into that. And at the bottom you can see, or maybe you can see, as Ted notes, this is not Niebuhr's exact vocabulary, but it's Ted's kind of underlying insight that self-deification corrupts our moral causes. That's Niebuhr's. And then the Christian posture toward the crisis: don't try to win the cursing contest. As much fun as it might be.
Yes.
Refuse it. Defy the mob. Justice belongs to God alone. We are simul justus et peccator. Name injustice without self-deifying our cause. We're simultaneously sinners and justified at the same time. Niebuhr says religious faith ought to therefore be a constant fount of humility. So, any questions about any of that stuff? Or I know there's a lot there. So let's move on to discussion questions. And they're kind of in two categories. One, to further clarify the readings, and then secondly, to kind of apply them, what we've learned, to our present crisis. So, clarify the readings. So Niebuhr insists that property is power. How is that different from seeing property simply as the rightful fruit of our own labor? Mine. What changes once we see it as power? Any thoughts?
So if you're not an owner, you're a loser.
If you're not an owner,
If you don't
you're a loser.
own property, you're a loser. We don't pay any, I learned today that renters in Strawberry have no input into this big development that they're going to be doing up on the seminary property. They send nothing to renters, even though there are hundreds of renters that live in that area. So does that apply to this?
It sounds like property is power, right?
Yeah.
Question, I think I know the answer, but could you define what Niebuhr means by property? I assume it's money and perhaps land and
I think
other things?
Linda might have an answer
Do you have
here.
an answer?
Just about everything.
Everything.
Others?
Well, I think in an economic sense, I mean, just talking about economics and political economy, we talked about property a lot, and I think land is in a special category. And and is why there's a lot of fights over it. So that certainly, I mean, thinking about whether that should be community property or something you can own, why would land be someone's own because of the fruit of their own labor? That's not entirely clear to me. I mean, other things, buildings and things you create, I think that's a different sort of property. But then the third thing is what you said there a couple of times where you're talking about justice is property. So this idea, some sort of morality or something like that you think you can own that as property, that's a whole nother category.
Mm-hmm.
My question that follows up on that is, how do you change people's perspective on that? Because that property ownership thing, having something is, what do I want to say? It's the foundation almost of what, I'm trying to say things nicely, and I'm not having a very good time.
You don't need to be nice, you're with friends.
But that's a foundation principle of what we think we don't want. And changing that perspective, because as I said last week, I really think the problems that underlie the self-interest is greed and fear of losing that. So that's the enigma that I see in this property power and power thing.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, it occurred to me when you say that property ownership is so deep in our DNA as Americans. I don't know if it's this way in every country around the world, but I know, property, who could vote at first? Wasn't it property owners?
Oh, yeah.
Not everyone could vote, which I was shocked when I learned that years ago. And then, years ago, I read a book about, the housing crisis. And a big, or a part of the issue we face today is the fact that current property owners do not want a lot more housing built because our values go down. And that our property values go down. So property is, property, as you're talking, Jim, that's kind of special category rather than everything we have, is, yeah. And I know when we talk about stewardship in church, we talk about everything we have as a gift from God, which is really swimming upstream from, it's mine, doggone it. I earned it. What do you mean I have to pay taxes? I earned this money.
And we're afraid that we won't have enough.
Of course. Yeah, you're right. It's the fear. As somebody said, for those who own homes in America, that is their major asset by far. Okay, let's move on. So Niebuhr says liberalism and Marxism share a common illusion of the children of light. What is that shared illusion? And where does each one go wrong? So what is the shared illusion?
That selfishness and greed won't make it all go to, all fall apart, just in different ways, but selfishness dooms both systems. I mean, dooms the hopes of the children of light as well as the utopian Marxian ideals.
Other thoughts on that? I think in the book he talks about Marxism thinking that property ownership is the root of all evil. And that if that goes away...
That's right. What the Marxists saw as an agrarian society became a bourgeois society is that the kings, or in the case of Russia, the emperor of Russia, owned vast amounts of land, and then the poor people were sharecroppers who were working for the wealthy landowners, and they thought that was, the fact that property was in the hands of the few instead of the many, they thought that was the source of injustice. And then with industrialization, it shifted from landowners to management and business and capital investors, and then the workers simply moved from the land to the cities, but they still were subordinate. And so the Marxists thought, that's the problem, is private property, so we'll make property public. And hence the word communism means property belongs to the community. And I visited the Soviet Union twice. And you know what? The capitalists were right. Because if you went to one of the farms, the government farms, the workers rather sat in the barn and played cards rather than getting out and working to grow the crops. I mean, the whole thing just didn't work. And Niebuhr would say, it's because you're utopian. You don't understand human nature. So we in the West have a different problem. It's private property that you use as a baseball bat to beat other people over the head with. And in the Marxist system, it's public property that you beat people over the head with. Both of them are a delusion, he says. It's not who owns the property that's the problem. And I want to talk about what Linda brought up a little bit. You used the word fear of losing our property. I think the underlying word is anxiety. And anxiety is the fear of non-being. You lose the security of your existence. And one of the delusions that we live with is that property secures us. I had a neighbor friend with a bumper sticker. It was something like, the older you get, the more toys you buy, and then you die. And it's Jesus's parable of the rich man who puts the grain in the farms. No matter how much property you own, you still die. And you can't take it with you. And so there's this illusion working that somehow or other owning things will protect us from death. You don't think about it that way, but that's the underlying anxiety. And what Niebuhr noticed is, the Marxist view was, if everybody has a secure living, an adequate income, then they will no longer fight with each other. And Niebuhr says that's not true, because if you get an adequate income, you only want more and more and more, because owning property is an insatiable desire, and it's driven by this illusion that we're protecting ourselves from death. And so Niebuhr thinks, well, if God says, don't worry about death, I got that one taken care of, then you won't be constricted by this anxiety, and you can give things away. Funny thing, the Christians want us to give things away. At any rate, I think that's kind of, neighbor doesn't say it that way, but it's almost there. And that's where I think he gets his realism from the Christian faith.
You know, while we're talking about a lot of history in here, there's a late 19th century economist following Marx that I had an interesting take on this whole property is power thing, but recognizing, unlike Marx, that the idea is not just to completely make it all community property, but as Henry George had these, and it's always been somewhat surprising to me, he didn't go farther than he did, that a lot of people haven't even heard of him.
Is he British
He's
or
known
American?
he's known for what he called the single tax. In his view, the only thing that should be taxed is land, because land has that ultimate value, that community value, although I don't think he used that term, but his idea was everything came ultimately from the land. Other things people produce and should be paid for. So his idea was government shouldn't be taxing income, but they should be taxing land. And it will change over time. You tax land over what its potential value is, so that you can't just hold land and say, well, that's producing nothing, so I don't have to pay tax on it. Governments would tax land on its potential value. But it's interesting in this context that I think that's the way of trying to capture for the community the value in the land. It's unique among economists and pretty much ignored by everybody. Nobody ever paid attention to Henry George.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why that can't work is with the rise of the bourgeoisie and people whose wealth is really found in business. It's no longer land. People travel a lot. Believe it or not, my son lives in Florida and works in California, and he commutes. I mean, the place is not what's important to him, but he's in a business. And so the business is not tied to the land in the way that it was a couple hundred years ago. And so you have to adapt to that. His business is better get taxed.
Yeah, it was much more of an agricultural mindset as opposed to the corporate world we have now.
Right, but even with COVID, its business can be less tied to land in the sense that we telecommute as opposed to fly, I guess he's doing.
He flies. he has a lot of miles.
I bet. So, yeah. So what does Niebuhr mean by calling democracy a method of finding proximate solutions for insoluble problems? Why insoluble and why settle for proximate? I looked this up because I didn't understand. I wanted to know more precisely what proximate meant.
Yeah.
And when I looked it up, it said it comes from the Latin proximus, nearest. A proximate solution is the nearest or best available one, partial, approximate, and provisional, as opposed to an ultimate solution. So, what does Niebuhr mean by calling democracy a method for finding proximate solutions for insoluble problems? Go for it, Linda.
It calls for compromise. And that is so difficult in such a divided culture. And we're seeing the results of not being able to see other perspectives. Ruth and I were having an interesting talk before this. Ruth talk a little bit.
So I think what Linda's referring to is I just finished a Route 66 trip with my best friend. So 2,000 miles or so of in the car in different discussions through different parts of the country that are not blue Marin County. She and I do not agree on everything, but I was saying to Linda, the point is to be able to have the conversation. So when things did come up, my goal was to help her at least consider a different perspective. I didn't go into the conversation trying to make my point the final point, you have to think this way or else X, Y, Z. We've known each other since we were 7, so that wouldn't have mattered anyway. We know each other too well. But the point that I was saying to Linda was, I think, because she was asking a hope, where's the hope in this and how can we, as individuals, as Christian individuals, help move the dialogue to a better place? So my point to her was just saying it has to be done, in my view, on a one-to-one basis. And my goal was just even having my friend consider a different option, I took as a win.
Other thoughts? Or, yeah.
I would like to ask a question. Like, all right, you have successfully now listened to somebody who disagrees with you, and you've affirmed each other in good California way, and you're friends. Right now, what Linda was talking about was compromise. Let's say you make a decision in which neither one gets everything they want. How do you look at compromise?
I agree with Linda that there has to be a step in moving forward. If you're asking on a personal basis or this sort of situation, I don't know that we ever got to that point where a decision had to be made, more of a, I hear what you're saying, without attacking each other.
So you want to go to Burger King and your friend wants to go to Maxime de Paris, and you end up going to Il Davide?
Well, there is Lyft and Uber, so we could both, one could be dropped off. Yeah.
Well, it used to be a given that that's what politicians did is compromise. Everybody put out their what they want to get to, knowing that they're not going to get it all, and then they finally come together. But pretty much sometime in the last 10 to, it's not just since 2016, but it's certainly accelerated, that compromise doesn't seem to be a goal for,
that's right.
I would say, the majority of elected politicians. I mean, they get elected on these days on platforms of I'm not going to compromise.
That's right.
It might be more on one side than the other, but it could be on both sides. It's people on the Democratic side are tired of always giving in, and so they want people who are going to fight. And for years now, people on Republicans have been saying, I'm not going to, we're not going to, so they get elected on a platform of I will not compromise.
Right.
I think you're kind of stuck at that point. I mean, that's kind of sand in the gears of government.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the phrase from the 80s that what government is not the solution, it's the problem. And that's kind of been the way folks have acted. Congress people have acted since then.
And they act as though insoluble and proximate are not even in their vocabulary. And I think what we hear from one person I'm thinking of is he thinks that any problem is solvable and he can solve it.
Oh, you mean Pastor Todd?
No. Farther, the other coast,
I can, however.
Oh, yeah.
the current occupant of the White House. He just
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
he can solve anything, apparently, and so insoluble would not be in his vocabulary, I believe. And neither would proximate.
I think the insolubility, I think he means is you've got a society in which everyone is motivated by selfish desires, in which they want the goods to come to them. They're not motivated by the common good, which is necessary for everyone to get their private good. I think that's the insoluble problem for Niebuhr. And so what good democratic government does is it keeps, that's why it's a process and not a system, it keeps trying to balance the common good with the self-interest of the factions and the individuals. And you never get the perfect harmony between the common good and our private goods. I think that's what he means. And he says, if you get an approximate good, be happy. You've achieved something.
Wasn't it Winston Churchill or somebody who said that the democracy is the best, is the worst form of government except for all the others?
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know
meaning
who
that
said
it's-
it, but I love it. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, let's go to the next one. So Ted sums up Niebuhr's double maxim as the wisdom of the serpent and the harmlessness of the dove. What do you think it might look like in practice to hold both halves together? How can we be, Ted, how can we be as wise as serpents and as innocent or harmless as doves?
Well, he's quoting Jesus, and I have a hunch that Jesus has a sense of humor here because he doesn't mean literally, before you go to court, you find out what that SOB who's suing you has as a weakness, and then you manipulate it, right? He's saying that's the cleverness of the child of darkness. And you have to be as wise as the child of darkness in terms of understanding what the power dynamics are in any kind of battle. When Jesus says harmless, Niebuhr sometimes translates that as not harmless, but non-malicious. So you should use power, legal power, in a non-malicious way. That is to say, you don't want to punish the victim. You don't want to punish the one that you're using power against. So I don't think he means innocent in the naive sense. I think he means that you use justice against injustice for the sake of the common good, not for your own advantage. So I don't think he means this literally at all. I think he has kind of other ways of saying it.
But
Niebuhr also says something that would be very disconcerting to an evangelical. He says, don't ask Jesus for your ethics. Don't ask Jesus to do your ethics for you. Even though he quotes Jesus, this is obviously Jesus he's quoting. He says, because you gotta really think about things having to do with human nature. And if you recognize that human nature is always driven by self-interest, and you really want the common good to blunt the damage that can do, he says you need another kind of wisdom that goes beyond the teachings of Jesus.
I mean, is that similar to when he talks about Jesus has no relevance to our political systems?
Did you say that?
I mean, that's not a quote.
No, but it's
more an
it is
individual
the kind of thing that I think he does say that. I have a hunch he overstates the case because, as I say, he picks up on Jesus a lot, but he doesn't want to blame Jesus for his own political philosophy. You know?
I did hear an interview with Gary Dorian, who wrote the introduction, and I hadn't heard this before, but he called Niebuhr a polemicist.
Oh.
Which made me think that some of his things were hot takes, as it were, as opposed. So
Let
it
me
was
just say, I
maybe-
never thought of
maybe
Niebuhr as a
personally
polemicist.
He was pushing things.
Well, there was one polemic that is very important, and that is in the late 1930s. You had two important groups, the isolationists politically, and the liberal Protestants wanted to stay out of the war in Europe. And so the liberal Protestants advocated pacifism. Jesus teaches pacifism. You just let the enemy do you in. Niebuhr thought that's a mistake because we don't want to all be speaking German in this country. And so he was a strong advocate of going to war against Europe. The only way to stop the Nazis is by bombing them. And so in that sense, he was a polemicist leading up to 1941 in favor of actually going to war against the pacifists. But I don't know if that's what Gary Dorian means by that or not. I don't know.
So along those lines, I was thinking before, but now that you mentioned the 30s and pacifism as well, I'm wondering, did Niebuhr ever have anything to say, either in his writings, about Gandhi? And I mean, because, Gandhi was doing things in the 30s and 40s as well. And so with that, I mean, when you think about pacifism and getting things done through pacifism, certainly Gandhi always comes to mind.
I think that's a very good question, but one of the things that pacifists try to pull the wool over your eyes on is that pacifism is actually a form of power against power. Now, what Gandhi realized, remember he spent some time in England before he launched his independence movement. He learned that the British people are children of light. They believe in freedom, justice, democracy, equality, and they believe it fervently. He used that against them. So he would stage these labor demonstrations, and management would send the police out and beat the people. Oh, it just hurt the British heart. He was using power against power, but it was cultural power. It wasn't military or economic, well, it was economic, but cultural power. So pacifism is still very
And so then Martin Luther King learned a lot from that for the civil rights.
He copied that, and it worked.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's move on to, let's see. So, Ted asks whether justice itself can become property and uses one recent example, the 2026 Supreme Court tariff ruling, and the response to it, to show what owning justice looks like. How does it illustrate his point? Can you think of others from any side? So how does Ted illustrate that point with that example? So who is, in that example, who is owning justice? I think what you were getting at was that the president, in his response, is saying, in effect, this is what justice is, and that ain't justice.
That's right.
In other words, I know what justice is because I own it, and
The Supreme Court doesn't. They're unjust. Yeah.
Right. Which, of course, is, that first of all, it's very typical of the president. He defines everything, including eternal verities of justice. But it's also ironic because the Supreme Court is the one that decides justice in our country. Right. So does that make sense?
It's kind of a slippery concept.
What,
I mean,
to
it's
own
a big, well, just justice. I mean, because you can define it so many different, or give examples of it in so many different ways.
Yes, and let me see, because I wanted to ask you, Ted, what you meant by, you say, it might be better to say that justice, when you're talking about owning justice, and we children of the light think we as a community decide what justice is. You say it might be better to say that justice is an eternal verity. Justice is a transcendent standard that we know intuitively. Please explain. And I'll intuit whether you're...
I have to embellish Jesus with Plato here.
Oh. Wow.
Justice is an eternal
Form.
an eternal form. And you and I, when we engage in just behavior, we're participating in that eternal form. There's an eternal dimension to it. And whenever you and I engage in just behavior, we are participating in this, but only in a fragmentary way. Mm-hmm. You can't have perfect justice, at least for more than 5 or 10 minutes, because it kind of slips away. And so I say, nobody owns justice except God. But you and I want to think, this is where the Lutheran insight, I think, is so important. You and I would love to own this justice. And the way we carry on the delusion is almost every day, and I'm sure that we're all sanctified here, so none of you do this, but we draw a line between good and evil, and we put ourselves on the good side, and we put somebody else on the bad side. And whether we use the word justice or not, we're saying that person is unjust, I am just, and tacitly we're saying, I'm godly, and they're not. I am eternal, and they are temporal. And in fact, because justice has a retributive dimension to it, if I punish the unjust person, if I make them suffer, I'm doing the eternal work. So when the president says the Supreme Court is unjust, and in fact, I think they're traitors because they're taking bribes from foreign nations, and I am the victim of their injustice, he's saying, in effect, I am eternal. I am participating in what is eternally true. And the Supreme Court is temporal, it's wrong, and in fact, if I had the power, I'd remove those justices and replace them with others. And I think both Jesus and St. Paul want to say, this is a delusion, this is false. And so what the Lutherans want to keep emphasizing is that you and I are unjust. God gives us the justice, whether we deserve it or not. It's not ours to possess. It's a gift. And if you feel that you are justified by God, you don't have to draw a line between good and evil and then punish those unjust ones. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the nub of human nature. And you saw in the article, one of the problems, and this is in general true in politics, but especially right now, it is so confusing because everybody in an argument is tacitly saying that justice is on their side and that the others are unjust, ergo we have the right to victimize them. And how do you get through that morass? I mean, even the children of light, I don't think have even the vocabulary to clarify what's going on. This is, for me, one of the biggest frustrations about our current crisis.
Just a thought. I think it's best to keep in mind that justice in itself is not the totality of good. The Bible tells us to love justice and, to do justice and to love mercy, which is a different thing, and to walk humbly with God. So it isn't, doing things right isn't just about what's just, although we talk about that as absolute, but there's more to it than that.
No, and
this arises particularly to me with respect to people who are undocumented immigrants into the United States. There's something else besides justice that needs to come into that.
Absolutely, and Niebuhr actually frequently will say just what you said about love and humility in addition to justice. And occasionally, he'll even say, well, justice is one of the ways that you love other people. But with regard to inviting immigrants who are fleeing poverty or fleeing oppression into America, that's love, whether it's just or not. It is love, and Niebuhr's in favor of that.
Yeah, I think he says love is the animating force that drives all of
Yeah, that's right.
him.
Yeah.
Well, let me, kind of a related thing, let me get to something. Okay, Ted says, all public combatants self-justify and curse their opponents. Where do we hear cursing and dehumanizing language, vermin, parasites, radical left Marxists today? Is that temptation confined to one side, or does it tempt us all? Well,
I think in line with, I mean, it segues nicely from what we were just talking about justice. I mean, we all think we're on the side of good, so that's natural, and that's not going to change. But when it becomes extreme enough where you, just because you're on the side of good, that everyone on the other, you draw a line and everyone on the other side of that line is evil, then that's where you have problems.
But some people are really evil. Come on, Jim.
Could you give me a list, please?
Well, I think about, you know, I first, this is going back a little ways, I first kind of encountered some of this issue personally when in my reaction to 9/11, because I thought, on the one hand, the people who perpetrated, the World Trade Center and all the other things that happened that day, they justified it religiously.
It is.
Right? And then I saw our own response as a country, and we were using religious language to justify our response. We had drawn a line in the sand, and then it occurred to me, what's the difference between one violence and another violence? Violence is violence, right?
Right.
But we all tend to do it in a self-justifying way.
150,000 people in Iraq lost their lives.
Yeah. And we look at Iran today, and what do we hear over and over again? How evil those people are. And how many people have died because of our bombing campaign? You know, they talk about, tens of thousands. I mean, they keep inflating the number of people who were, and I'm sure killed by the government for the uprising earlier in the year. So it's a tricky thing. I don't know. It is because we're all, as Niebuhr says, we're all sinful. As our faith tells us, we're all self-justifying. Other thoughts? I mean, I also see it in sports. There's usually somebody who's the scapegoat for why we lost the other night. They're the ones, we all did everything right, but that person, doggone it, he missed that field goal. It was out too late the night before.
Just a wish. Why doesn't the Holy Spirit speak a little louder?
Yeah. Doug, if we draw a line between good and evil, put ourselves on the good side, and the Holy Spirit on the other side.
Just needs to step it up.
I think the good thing about this paradox is that the human spirit is directed toward God. That is to say, for whatever reason, we want justice on our side. The bad side of that is we claim it when we don't deserve it. And And that only enhances the conflict and makes the conflict even worse. And so all this Christian stuff about forgiving the sinner is a way of trying to break through that matrix.
I remember when I was substitute teaching a lot, and it really struck me. I always had trouble with the lower elementary, kindergarten, first grade, because it seems like all the young kids had a very intuitive sense of justice, because they were always coming to me saying, teacher, so-and-so did this, that, that's not right. Even the tone of my voice. And I'm like, oh gosh, I have to deal with this all the time. These, seemingly unjust situations.
Right.
Well, let's move on to, let's see, this one. Ted ends with Hauerwas. Refused to rejoice that somebody got what they had coming. What? How hard is that when we're sure we're right? What does the cross, an innocent victim absorbing the crowd's violence, teach us about resisting scapegoating? Anything?
Schadenfreude is just going to be too hard to give up. That is
That
just
German
that's just
word
like one of
Schadenfreude
the
is just the right one.
one of the most purest joys in the world.
Right.
What do they say about revenge? It's
Well, the Church of Satan in San Francisco listed, it's a hedonist church, all the pleasures, and that was their conclusion. The greatest pleasure you can have is Schadenfreude, where you rejoice over someone suffering for their injustice.
Yeah, but I like it even better than revenge, because it's I didn't do it, They had what they had coming, but not from me. It,
Yeah.
it must have been from God.
the universe exacted its justice.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
C.S. Lewis's The Screw Tape Letters.
Oh, that's right, it is in that, yeah, right, yeah. I don't think he uses the word, but it's the notion, yeah.
Thank you all for
Thank you,
coming.
Pastor.
Sure, thank you. Thank everyone for coming. So, yeah,
And we have 2 more sessions, or what do we have?
correct. The 14th and the 21st. So next week is chapter 4, which is,
Community, I think.
yeah, community
Commu-
and,
Then the last one's world community.
right.